Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jevly, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Tim Meyers. He is here to celebrate his wonderful book, Glad to Be Dad. Before we invite Tim into the studio, we want to let you know we have a brand new Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read. Everybody's Good at Something, written by Susan Rose and illustrated by Emily Hercock. This is a book about self-esteem. It will help your child build his or her self-esteem and find out what he or she is good at. The story follows a young girl named Katie and how she discovered what she is good at. Along the way, she discovers the amazing benefits of practicing yoga, and she learns the powerful message: everybody is good at something. This beautiful book is a great introduction to yoga for little ones. The fun and calming story incorporates a variety of simple poses while teaching kids how yoga can help them to relax and slow down. The gentle illustrations accompanying the story are relaxing on their own and place emphasis on the calm nature of yoga, as well as how fun it is to practice yoga with friends. These colorful illustrations place the poses in situations that kids will want to imagine themselves doing. The book offers tips on how to use the book with your kids, as well as encouraging parents to get some more information. This would be a great way to start a discussion with your children about emotions while getting them moving and have fun. Congratulations once again to Susan Rose. Everybody's Good at Something is our latest Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read. You can read our entire review and blog at our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Joining us right now from Santa Clara in California. Our guest today is an author, a storyteller, a songwriter, a singer. Please welcome to the show the author of Glad to Be Dad, Tim Meyers. Tim, welcome to the Reading with Your Kids podcast.
How can I possibly live up to that wonderful introduction? I mean, that's like an Elvis introduction, and I am not Elvis, but I am delighted to be here, Jed. Thank you very much.
Well, any author who writes a book called Glad to Be Dad is number one in my book, because I am a firm believer that being a dad is the most important job in the world. Maybe second next to being a mom. But being a parent is such an important job, and it's something that too many of us kind of, don't think about enough.
Absolutely. You know, I remember reading years ago in National Geographic. It's this thing about looking at the roots of human experience and what makes a better world. And this little line in National Geographic was, people forget that every year the most important event on Earth is the harvest. And I was just struck by that. I thought, I don't think about what's happening in the farms with the farmers. And in the psychological world, in the world of human experience, there are two groups of people who are absolutely doing more for or against the world than anybody else. And those are parents and teachers. And the teachers have a huge influence, and I've been a teacher for a long time. But obviously the deepest and longest lasting influence, for good or ill, comes from parents.
Yeah.
Or guardians. So obviously there are plenty of kids living with grandparents and other guardians.
Right.
So again, that's one of the reasons I wrote this book. I totally agree with you. My work, so to speak, I don't mean to call it that because I don't think of it that way, but my work as a dad, as a parent, is absolutely the most important thing I do, like my work as a husband, like my work as a member of my own parents' family, et cetera. I couldn't agree with you more, Jeff.
Yeah. We really have that backwards. It's like job comes first, profession comes first, and if I have enough time, we'll get to the soccer game and spend time reading with the kids. That should be completely reversed, I think.
Well, when you look at our society, now I'm going to generalize a little bit here, but I often think about how we've got it exactly upside down in the way we pay people. Mm-hmm. So what you tend to see is that people who work with, the more abstract your work is, the more you're paid. Mm-hmm. And the more human your work is, the less you're paid. So at the bottom of it, I mean, parents don't get paid. I'm not saying they should, but childcare workers, for example, teachers, some places teachers make good salaries. A lot of places they don't. And I think teachers should make more. As you go up the scale, people who work with objects, like people who blue collar jobs, depending on the job, they tend to make it a certain level. But when you work with abstractions like money and finances, some of the richest people in the world are working, with those things. Now, I'm not against people making money at all the levels of this, but I do think it's kind of strange that we have a world in which we have CEOs who make way too much money from what a lot of us are saying these days. And you've got childcare workers that, where the whole future of a society is the children who are going to be the society. And it's really hard to get a good wage as a childcare worker.
Yep.
That again, and it's kind of that upside down thing. It's funny when you think of it in one way, children are the greatest voiceless group that's out there. They don't have much power that, adults have to speak for them. So consequently, this isn't always understood. And of course, there's a long history. And guys in our generation, I'm older than you are, but there was this expectation that you were the macho breadwinner and that all this stuff with the kids had nothing to do with you. And I'm like, these are my children. My relationship with them is everything to me, and it's incredibly important to them. So again, Jed, you and I are on the same page about this.
Absolutely. As someone who started life coming out of college as a social worker who made not enough to live on. I ate beefaroni for a year, and I had a waistline to show for it.
I love that. I suppose there are people who won't know what that reference means. I don't know if they still sell that stuff, but beefaroni, man, that's part of my American childhood.
Yeah, beefaroni and SpaghettiOs and raviolis, and tastes delicious. Not very nutritious, I guess. But
well, now it's ramen, right?
That's right. Yes.
But that's incredible to think of you as a social worker. Again, that's a great example. I wish I'd included that. And I think we're shifting in that direction, but working with people, that should be the priority.
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned people, working in finance. What are they doing? They're hitting buttons and they're making this thing called money grow somehow, but not adding water to it, just trading it back and it's
right.
It boggles my mind. And you're right. Meanwhile we have kids who are starving for attention. Kids who are starving for attention from a lot of those men and women who are spending and they're killing themselves because of the stress that those jobs put them under. It's just, we have things upside down and backwards.
Jed, honestly, this is really kind of spooky to me how beautifully you put your finger on this book. Because one of the main reasons I wrote the book, we all know the recent, the last 50-year history of American family structures, right? When women came into the workforce in huge numbers, starting in the 70s with feminism, we had this weird situation where we had a culture that was out of whack. And I don't mean out of whack in the sense I want to go back to the past. I don't want that at all.
Right.
What I want us to do is adjust in the future. So one of the things that happened was you had women at work, and the pressure being put on women was unbelievable. You have to be a full-time professional or whatever amount of hours you're working. And women, and even today, statistics show that women are still doing two working spouses or whatever. Not every family is made up that way because every kind of family is good as far as I'm concerned. But in those families, she's working just as hard as he is, but she is doing more housework. She's doing more domestic work. And part of that was, and it's the kind of family I grew up in. I love my parents, and my parents worked their tails off for us, but it was a very clear split. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm a feminist. I don't believe in that anymore. But I will say one thing about that system. It worked. To the degree that it worked, because you had one person who was responsible for the home front, right, and the other was responsible. So the organization of labor worked. What we need now is to bring men, and men are doing this now, but to bring men more fully into the domestic sphere. And the key is exactly what you said, and this is what really impresses me that you would put your finger on that. It's better for men.
Sure. Yeah.
It's much better for men. You have better relationships with your family. You have better relationships with your spouse. You got to decouple a little bit from all the crazy, animal and harness male achievement role that has hurt people. And this is not to say anything against hardworking men who, have done so much to build, to support their families. My dad was an OB-GYN, and that man worked. He delivered 4 babies in one night. That was his record. He was leaving in the middle of the night all the time. So I would never fault my dad for that. Mm-hmm. But that structure isn't working it may work for a few people now. Because you have people where one person's making, whether it's a husband or wife, making a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And if the other person decides to be the domestic person, that's great. People get to divide that any way they want. But for most people, both spouses, gay people, straight people, whatever, mm-hmm. both spouses are working. And that division is absolutely critical. And I don't, I get political about it, but what concerns me the most is what's happening to our kids.
Right.
What are our kids doing?
Yeah.
Like you said, starve for attention.
Yeah.
And that happens too often.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's, and you can't blame parents because they're looking out and they're looking at the future. They're looking at their kids. The kids are in kindergarten. The minute the kids come into the world, the parents, friends, and neighbors are saying, well, you got to get the kid into the best preschool.
Yeah.
And you got to start saving for money, because right now college is, here in Boston, college is $75,000, $80,000 a year. Your kid's just born. What's it going to be like in 18 years? Just think of the money that you have to save. And meanwhile, they don't understand that, okay, maybe your kid's not going to be able to go to Harvard. You're not going to have that $150,000 a year to send your kid to Harvard. That's okay if you spend time with your kids.
Well, and the irony there, too, is that, again, I totally agree that and I taught high school and middle school for a long time. I was a teacher educator for almost 20 years. There's kind of a mania, particularly in schools in wealthier neighborhoods, mm-hmm. the kind of schools that place a lot of kids in college. There's a kind of mania of achievement whereby kids have to load up their schedules with all these AP courses, and everything is about, your SAT score should be tattooed across your forehead, right? What's interesting is we never pushed our kids in that direction. We always, and I'm not saying everybody can do this, but my wife or I, one of us was always at home full time. And again, that's not something everybody can do. And it hurt us financially many times, but our kids ended up being incredibly successful. And a lot of that came directly from the fact that they had somebody at home with them who was, firing up their brains with stories and talk and music and experiences and let's go hike here and let's do that. So, and it's interesting you mentioned Harvard because one of my sons, I got one son, here's where I get to brag, it's completely legitimate, right? One son who is a professor at the University of Colorado Boulder. My second son just is about to graduate, get his PhD from Cornell, and he just got a postdoc at Harvard. And again, this is coming from this family that did not overload all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And my daughter has written 5 novels, still working on getting published, and she works as a communications associate with Stanford Department of Medicine. So we're like, you guys, we didn't take that mania route, that academic achievement at all costs, push the kids. We took family. We're always committed to each other. We're having fun together with language and with life. And, it can really work out.
Yeah.
So it's a trade-off. Like you're saying, it doesn't have to be this trade-off like you have to make $10,000 a day so you can pay for your kid's college down the line. Load the kid's brain up and the kid will get scholarships, et cetera, if that's possible. It can be done that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And the kid will sit down and learn that, yeah, if I can get into Cornell, if I can get into Harvard, that's awesome. But if I can learn how to get along with my friends and be a good, empathetic person, that's pretty important and pretty valuable too.
That's interesting you say that too, because one of the things I always want to emphasize about this book is it's not just like a political tract or, it's not just about do this as there's all this pressure on parents, like you say, and these days it's gotten more complicated. A kid who learns how to get along with people, a kid who has basic self-discipline, and a kid who has fun. So this book, I swear to God, is full of humor. As anybody who's been in a family life, unless there are real problems in the family, so many funny things happen just with kids. This is just the way it goes. So I'll tell you what, my sons are young. We're sitting there having lunch. It's in the summer, and I stayed home with them again with my kids twice. So full time,
Mm-hmm.
you know, with my sons when they were younger, with my daughter when she was born. So I'm always the teacher, you know. So one of my sons says to me, I mean, they're like probably 4 and 6 or whatever, says, Dad, why are there seasons? You know, why is there fall and winter and summer? And I'm like, teaching moment. So there's an orange in a bowl of fruit there, right? I pull out the orange and I go, look, you guys, this orange is the sun. And my thumb is like the earth. And, you know, and I'm explaining how the earth goes around the sun and the rays are slanted and they're just looking up at me with big wide eyes. And I'm just like, oh my God, I'm teaching them. And I get done and I say, so you get it? And my son says, Dad, can I have that orange? Here I was, you know, it's like this big parenting expert. And it's like, no, I underestimated the realistic nature of kids. You know? There's a lot of that stuff in the book. It's really pretty funny.
Yeah.
It's a fun experience. Yeah, despite all the work, it's a very fun experience.
Mm-hmm. Yes. It was the best part of my life, being a dad. And I was mentioning to Tim, you know, where we hosted international kids, and my wife and I looked at that role of, you know, we weren't landlords to the kids who came here from different countries to live with us, and we always did this really cool. It kind of blew the kids' minds, but it set the tone when we would always pick them up at the airport, which was something different. The school would, we'll get them a bus. I'm like, no, we'll pick them up at the airport.
No, that's exactly right.
And I would come home, and I would always stop before we go in the house, and I'd say, hey, do you see the sign over the house where it says hotel? And the kids would look at me like, no. I go, good, because there is none. This is a home, and you're part of our family now. Oh, shit. And it would, you know, and it took some kids a while to kind of like, is he just kind of kidding me? Is this just a line he says? But
that is beautiful. That's beautiful. You know, there's another thing too, as a teacher, that as I spent more years teaching and I learned more. And again, middle school and high school, and I still work with almost exclusively first-year college students, right? So I've been working with adolescents for decades. I've realized that one of the most important, if not the single most important thing I do as a teacher, is invite these adolescents into the adult world. You know, welcome them into this community of responsible adults, which means I have to welcome them. That doesn't mean I don't push them, because I do. I have high expectations for them. But I'm like, you're just like me. I was your age at one point, and I was growing toward this role. And you and I should be really happy that we get to share this experience together, because again, the world is made of people more than anything else. We forget that. An economy, like you said, seems to be made of numbers. I mean, I appreciate what the people in the finance sector do, but it's not the whole ball of wax. So for you to stop there, and just the detail of driving out to the airport, which in Boston must be a royal pain, making sure that you made that personal connection with that student as a human being first. And then like saying, this is you're part of this home. This is what builds the future, I think, more than any other single thing we can do, is show that acknowledgement of an individual human being who we understand is developing toward a greater purpose. And we get to represent that greater purpose and help them get there.
Yeah.
It's a privilege.
And I think you'd probably agree with me as a teacher, we do that same thing, the same thing that I did with those kids, and a little joke about the hotel sign over my house. When we sit down with our kids when they're 2 and 3 and 4 years old, and make it a priority in our lives to sit down and spend 15, 20, 30 minutes, an hour every night with those kids, to read them stories, to ask them questions. You know, you are the most important person in your kid's life. Own that. Even when they're 13 and they tell you that they hate you, you're still the reason they hate you so much is because you're so important to them.
That's exactly right. By the way, that's a beautiful statement of that paradox. They are involved more than anything else in the drive for independence. Every human being begins as a fetus, and every step forward for that fertilized egg is this drive for independence, whether it's biological, emotional, physical, economic, or whatever. So when they're young, there's so much growth happening, and there's this great alliance between parent and child, or guardian and child. But when they're adolescents, it's a sign of their successful separation arc that they start getting negative towards you. And again, this is one of these things you've got to learn, because our parents sometimes just go crazy. It's like, this angel is suddenly hates me. And it's like, what is, and I'll always say, look, you got to realize adolescence is warped. They are in a it's like a larval stage where they go in and hang in a mucus membrane on the bottom of a leaf or something. And they have, of course, a tremendous social orientation, not to their families, but to their friends. And that's because they are on the way to establishing this independent person, this beautiful butterfly, to use an old metaphor, who emerges from the cocoon. And even as adults, we have, it's funny how often people will say they make a great accomplishment, and they'll often say, oh God, I wish my mom and dad were still alive to see it. And I'm like, that's not only love, that's part of that dependence on your parents, that you want to know what they think and feel of you. Even when you're 60 years old, you want to know, that they have that for you. So your point about bedtime, in my house, bedtime reading was a sacrament, right? And to me, it's incredibly powerful. And that's, by the way, that's why the combination, this sounds like I'm doing promo, but this is the children's book, Full of Empty. This kind of book shared by, and again, I'm not just pushing mine. There's so many great books out there, but it's bedtime. And like you said, and again, Jed, you hit the nail on the head. In our super busy lives, and not everybody lives that, but a lot of people do. I'd say the vast majority of people are busy all the time. You sit down next to the bed, or the kid in your lap, or I used to sit on the floor next to the bed, whatever. You're giving your entire attention to that kid. And it may be the only time in the day when you do that. I mean, it depends on what happens at dinner, or if people are home for meals and all this stuff. So you've got this thing where the parent is just saying, you are important. And what can we do in that moment? That warmth, that intimacy, that making of memories that last a lifetime, whether they're consciously remembered or not, that warm glow, we hitch it up to literacy. I mean, this is the greatest educational moment ever. You're like, look at sharing stories, sharing language, discussing things, all this. This is part of love, of what human togetherness is about. And again, we don't say that to kids. That message is rarely specified. And you're not going to tell the kid that. The kid's going, no, read me another story.
Right.
But it's happening.
Yeah.
It's happening at this moment, which is one of the reasons I write for children, because I know what that moment can mean.
Yeah. One of the things, and I often ask this of first-time authors when they come on the show, and a lot of the independent authors who've been working so hard to get their book published, and now they're learning, now I have to market the book, and, where am I going to store these 3,000 books that are in my basement? What am I going to do with them? How do I ship them in Amazon? And I always sit down and I said, have you taken the time to realize that there are going to be hundreds of families all over the world that are going to be snuggled up together reading your book? Now that you hear me say that, how does that make you feel? And it's so cool, because it's like, I never thought of it.
You've got that great tendency. I love that, just like looks into the heart of things. So I have to tell you a quick story about that. So my first book, we happened to go to Hawaii, and I'd learned before that there's a fish in Hawaii called the huma huma nuka nuka apawa. And we get there, and I find out there's another one. And of course, I taught my kids how to say it. And I find out there's another fish there called the lao vili vili nuka nuka oi oi. And my first thought as a writer is, well, what if those two got married? What would their other name make? So I write the book, right? And the book, it gets rejected. And that was a big, I can tell you stories about that too. Finally, it gets accepted. And after it gets accepted, my editor tells me, this is probably about 3 months after it came out. And she writes me an email, and she says, a friend of mine, she read the book to her little boy. Now, the thing is, too, the two types of fish, they argue about what to name the kid, because the father wants the kid to be called the huma huma nuka nuka son, and the mom wants it to be called the lao vili vili nuka nuka son. So, in other words, this is in Hawaii, too, where there's a huge mix of ethnicity and races. In fact, one time I read that there are 64 different combinations of ethnicities and marriages in Hawaii.
Wow.
So my editor tells me that her friend, a young mom, says, I read your book to my son, who's 5 years old, and at the end, because at the end the little fish gets his own name, which is Hapa, which, by the way, means mixed race in Japanese and is used in Hawaii that way. So the little kid says, he looks at the picture on the last page of the little fish, and he says, that's me. And he was a mixed ethnicity kid. So here I am, thousands of miles away, and I hear the story, just like you just said, and a family sat down with my book, and who knows how long that lasted in the mind of a 5-year-old, but something I wrote had a living presence, a positive living presence in the lives of other people, and on a topic that we need more of in this world. We need more racial harmony, not less.
Yeah.
And it was something that I was able to connect to. So you're exactly right. You know, the stuff you deal with as a parent, sometimes it's boring. You know, sometimes you feel frustrated. You know, both my wife and I are really ambitious, hardworking people. It was frustrating sometimes to be home. You feel like your brain's going to mush. You know, your kids are sometimes crappy. You know, they're human. All of this, you stop and remind yourself, what are we doing? We're shaping human hearts.
Yeah.
And it's not only that I care more about my kids than almost about myself. It's that I'm also shaping the world. Mm-hmm. How incredibly convenient that you can do those two things at once.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
What would this world be like, Jed, if everybody was a good parent? The world would be, can you imagine?
Yeah, it would be cool. It would be cool.
It would be cool.
And those little moments that you were speaking about, and you said, well, maybe that 5-year-old only thought about that for a second. But that's okay, because that 1 second of heaven, and that's what that kid felt in that moment. That one moment of heaven is combined with other little moments of heaven. And if we give our kids enough of those tiny little moments of heaven, they don't need to remember them individually. They just remember growing up surrounded by love.
That's right. Beautifully said.
Yeah. Hey, there's so much. We have to have you back on the show because we talked a little. We just talked.
That's what we did.
We haven't. We didn't get into your songwriting and storytelling, but I think that this is a good tease. Because I know we're going to have you back on the show and we're going to talk some more. But in the meantime, tell everybody where we can go to connect with you, because you have a great website, and I want people to go there not only to find out about Glad to Be Dad and Full of Empty and other books that are coming from our friends at Familius and all the other work you do, but I want them to find out about Tim Meyers and everything that you're involved with.
Jed, I so appreciate that. I would love to be back on your show. I mean, actually talking to you, I feel like we are sitting at a pub in Boston. We had everything but the beers, so it just feels so natural. I'm at timmyerstorysong.com, TIMMYERS. I have the unusual spelling. Storysong.com. That's my website. I'm on Facebook as Tim J. Meyers. I'm on Twitter as @TMyersStorySong. Again, that echoes that thing. Pardon me. And I'm on Instagram, and I can't remember my handle. I think it's something like that. Yeah. I'm easy to find. Plus, there are links to all that stuff on my website, so of course you can go to the website and jump from there. Thank you for the kind words about my website. I made it myself.
Well,
yeah.
It's a good skill to have, and you're probably like me, and the idea that build my own website. No, dude, I can't. I write books. No.
Do I look like a tech guy? I'm exactly like that. I'm getting a little better, though.
Oh, well, we've had a great time speaking to the author of Glad to Be Dad and A Kindred Spirit, Tim Meyers. Hey, Tim, thanks very much for being on the show.
Jed, I can't thank you enough. It has been a delight. You are the bomb.com, to use some slang that's probably 15 years old now.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Danielle LaRosa, and we'll also be speaking to the writers and editors of Home Cool Kids, a great group of 10-year-olds who started their own online magazine during the pandemic. They'll be joining us from the United Kingdom. It's a lot of fun. Hey, I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to thank our guest, Tim Meyers. Be sure to check out Glad to Be Dad and also Full of Empty. Also want to thank my team, Alejandro Doherty, Fatima Khan, Justina Thompson, Helen Fraser. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking through the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.